bin Laden, #1 on everybody's most wanted list in the world today. He's saying that, once again, that he did not do it. Don't hold him responsible. He's not guilty. He, of course, is the man that has been fingered by just about everybody in the world. And now he's released a statement really underlining that he had nothing to do with it. So let's go through the statement. There's some interesting aspects to this. He said, after the recent attacks which the U.S. has witnessed, the U.S. government ventured to point fingers at me, accuse me of involvement. The U.S. government has consistently blamed me for being behind every occasion its enemies attack it, that is the United States. And it goes on. I would like to assure the world that I did not plan the recent attacks, which seems to have been planned by people for personal reasons. And as for me, I have been living in the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan and following its leader's rules. The current leader does not allow me to exercise such operations.
Pakistan tomorrow will deliver a warning to the Taliban. Hand over prime suspect Osama bin Laden. Bin Laden issues a public statement denying any personal responsibility.
Spokesman for the Taliban denies Afghanistan allowed bin Laden to strike from its territory.
We in Afghanistan do not allow Osama bin Laden to use Afghanistan's territory to launch attacks against any country around the world. We took away all communication devices from him, and he does not have any communication with anybody outside of Afghanistan. In any case, we will conduct our own investigation and find out what happened, and we denounce this terrorist attack, whoever is behind it.
Our position in this regard is that if America have evidence and proofs, they should produce it, and we are ready for the trial of Osama bin Laden in the light of evidence.
President Bush's redirection in Iraq is leading some Americans to ask themselves, just how did we get here? Less than a month after the attacks of September the 11th, America began its war on terror in Afghanistan and the hunt for Osama bin Laden. Tonight, KSLA News 12's Jeff Farrell takes a closer look at these origins and discovered something that's still conspicuously absent.
The FBI's 10 Most Wanted poster reads, quote, Osama bin Laden is wanted in connection with the August 7, 1998 bombings of the United States embassies in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and Nairobi, Kenya. These attacks killed over 200 people. In addition, bin Laden is a suspect in other terrorist attacks throughout the world. It turns out, though, bin Laden has never been indicted for 9/11, and there's not a single mention of it directly in the FBI poster. Sheila Thorne in the FBI's New Orleans office told us, quote, the indictment could be superseded if necessary. In other words, 9/11 charges could be tacked on later for something many describe as the Pearl Harbor of our generation. As for why there is no mention at all of 9/11 in the FBI's 10 Most Wanted poster of Osama bin Laden, we wanted to get a comment from the White House as well. When we talked to a gentleman by the name of Blair Jones at the White House press office, he told us that we need to go back to justice, in other words, the FBI. We told him we wanted a separate comment, and he said, quote, we speak with one voice.
The FBI stated, the reason why 9/11 is not mentioned on Osama bin Laden's Most Wanted is because the FBI has no hard evidence connecting bin Laden to 9/11. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed confessed, but only after heavy torture.
Idaho attorney David Nevin represents the most well-known defendant in the case against the alleged 9/11 plotters, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Mohammed has been in custody since 2003. For more than 3 years, he was held in secret CIA black sites around the world and subjected to enhanced interrogation techniques that many regard as torture. Now, he has confessed to being involved in 9/11 at a high level. But your contention is that that confession came out under duress, under what we now know are multiple enhanced interrogation techniques that came out in a U.S. Senate report on the issue.
Yeah, enhanced interrogation technique is a euphemism for torture. What was done to him is unquestionably torture. The Senate Select Committee on Intelligence's executive summary, which was released last December, concluded that without any doubt.
Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was strapped to a board, tilted head down, a cloth placed over his face, and water poured over his mouth to give the sensation of drowning. But Rodriguez tells Stahl that Mohammed was tough. They had to pour the water more than 180 times.
I think that the cumulative effect of waterboarding and sleep deprivation and everything else that was done eventually got to him.
So what happens? Does he break down? Does he weep? Does he fall apart?
No, he gets a good night's sleep. He gets his Ensure. By the way, he was very heavy when he came to us, and he lost 50 pounds.
What, his Ensure? You mean like people in the hospital who drink that stuff?
Yes. Dietary manipulation was part of the standard techniques.
So sleep deprivation, dietary manipulation, I mean, this is Orwellian stuff. The United States doesn't do that.
Well, we do.
What surprised me the most was the clear acknowledgement that the people who committed the acts of torture committed rape. They raped these people. They also tortured them. Torture is a 20-year felony under United States law, and rape is a life felony in most states.
You're talking about the rectal rehydration that occurred?
Yes, rectal rehydration done without medical necessity for the purpose of controlling behavior. And again, rectal rehydration is a euphemism for penetration with a foreign object. And so the clarity and the open way in which it was revealed that these things had taken place, and the brutality of it, was surprising even to me, and I'd had plenty of opportunities to talk to my client about it. He is a torture victim, and the history is that people will say anything if they are tortured.
And Khalid Sheikh Mohammed said just about anything.
Mohammed, also known as KSM, openly testified he was Osama bin Laden's military commander. He then claimed responsibility for a litany of 28 terrorist attacks or plots around the world, and then some. In written testimony, he said he was responsible for the 9/11 operation from A to Z, and for the first attack on the World Trade Center in 1993. He said he was behind the bombing of a nightclub in Bali, the shoe bombing plot to blow up U.S. airliners over the Atlantic, and plans to attack the Sears Tower in Chicago and New York's Empire State Building. For the first time, KSM also claimed to have plotted to assassinate former presidents Bill Clinton, Jimmy Carter, and Pope John Paul II.
His torture was so bad that he wanted to die.
The alleged mastermind of the 9/11 attacks says he wants the death sentence. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is being held at the Guantanamo Bay Naval Base in Cuba on war crime charges. During his arraignment Thursday, he was told that he could face the death penalty if he's convicted. He responded by saying that's exactly what he was wishing for, so he could, quote, be a martyr for a long time, unquote.
In January 2001, a trial began in a Manhattan courtroom of 4 men accused of the embassy bombings in East Africa. But the Americans had also decided to prosecute bin Laden in his absence. But to do this under American law, the prosecutors needed evidence of a criminal organization, because as with the mafia, that would allow them to prosecute the head of the organization, even if he could not be linked directly to the crime. And the evidence for that organization was provided for them by an ex-associate of bin Laden's called Jamal al-Fadl.
During the investigation of the 1998 bombings, there is a walk-in source, Jamal al-Fadl, who's a Sudanese militant who was with bin Laden in the early 90s, who has been passed around a whole series of Middle Eastern secret services, none of whom want much to do with him, who ends up in America and is taken on by the American government effectively as a key prosecution witness and given a huge amount of American taxpayers' money at the same time. His account is used as raw material to build up a picture of Al-Qaeda. The picture that the FBI want to build up is one that will fit the existing laws that they will have to use to prosecute those responsible for the bombing. Now, those laws were drawn up to counteract organised crime, the mafia, drugs crime, crimes where people being a member of an organisation is extremely important. You have to have an organisation to get a prosecution. And you have Al-Fadl and a number of other witnesses, a number of other sources, who are happy to feed into this, who've got material that, looked at in a certain way, can be seen to show this organisation's existence. You put the two together and you get what is the first Bin Laden myth, the first Al-Qaeda myth. And because it's one of the first, it's extremely influential.
The picture Al-Fadl drew for the Americans of Bin Laden was of an all-powerful figure at the head of a large terrorist network that had an organised hierarchy of control. He also said that Bin Laden had given this network a name, Al-Qaeda. It was a dramatic and powerful picture of Bin Laden, but it bore little relationship to the truth. The reality was that Bin Laden and Ayman Zawahiri had become the focus of a loose association of disillusioned Islamist militants who were attracted by the new strategy. But there was no organisation. These were militants who mostly planned their own operations and looked to Bin Laden for funding and assistance. He was not their commander. There is also no evidence that Bin Laden used the term Al-Qaeda to refer to the name of a group until after September the 11th, when he realised that this was the term the Americans had given him. In reality, Jamal al-Fadl was on the run from Bin Laden, having stolen money from him. In return for his evidence, the Americans gave him witness protection in America and hundreds of thousands of dollars. Many lawyers at the trial believed that al-Fadl exaggerated and lied to give the Americans the picture of a terrorist organization that they needed to prosecute Bin Laden.
And there were selective portions of al-Fadl's testimony that I believe was false to help support the picture that he helped the Americans join together. I think he lied in a number of specific testimony about a unified image of what this organization was. It made Al-Qaeda the new mafia or the new communists. It made them identifiable as a group and therefore made it easier to prosecute any person associated with Al-Qaeda for any acts or statements made by Bin Laden, who talked a lot.
The idea, which is critical to the FBI's prosecution, that Bin Laden ran a coherent organization with operatives and cells all around the world, of which you could be a member, is a myth. There is no Al-Qaeda organization. There is no international network with a leader, with cadres who will unquestioningly obey orders, with tentacles that stretch out to sleeper cells in America, in Africa, in Europe. That idea of a coherent, structured terrorist network with an organized capability simply does not exist.
The search for Osama bin Laden, there was constant discussion about him hiding out in caves, and I think many times the American people have a perception that it's a little hole dug out of a side of a mountain.
Oh, no.
This is it. This is a fortress, yes. A complex, multi-tiered, bedrooms and offices on the top, as you can see. Secret exits on the side and on the bottom. Cut deep to avoid thermal detection. A ventilation system to allow people to breathe and to carry on. The entrance is large enough to drive trucks and even tanks, even computer systems and telephone systems. It's a very sophisticated operation.
Oh, you bet. This is serious business. And there's not one of those. There are many of those.
For days, the Americans bombed the mountains at Tora Bora with the most powerful weapons they had. The Northern Alliance had been paid more than $1 million for their help and information. And now their fighters set off up the mountains to storm bin Laden's fortress and bring back the Al-Qaeda terrorists and their leader. But all they found were a few small caves, which were either empty or had been used to store ammunition. There was no underground bunker system, no secret tunnels. The fortress didn't exist. The Northern Alliance did produce some prisoners they claimed were al-Qaeda fighters, but there was no proof of this. And one rumour was that the Northern Alliance was simply kidnapping anyone who looked remotely like an Arab and selling them to the Americans for yet more money. The Americans now began to search all the caves in all the mountains of eastern Afghanistan for the hidden al-Qaeda network.
We found a cave. The rest of it is open, break.
If nobody went up to look into that cave, people could have been hiding up there for days and watching everything that we did.
But wherever they looked, there was nothing there. Al-Qaeda seemed to have completely disappeared. But then, the British arrived to help. They were convinced they could hunt down Al-Qaeda because of what they said was their unique experience in fighting terrorism in Northern Ireland. They could succeed where others had failed.
The hunt for Al-Qaeda and Taliban goes on. And we stand shoulder to shoulder with the United States and our other coalition allies in the global war of terrorism.
But how many Al-Qaeda have you captured?
We haven't captured any Al-Qaeda, but...
And how many have you actually managed to kill here in southeast Afghanistan?
We haven't killed any.
Obviously, Al-Qaeda was the main reason that the Americans said they were going into Afghanistan and not the Taliban. Are you still of the view that Al-Qaeda is more of a myth than a reality? It's what you said last year. You also said you weren't even sure that they existed. Really?
Exactly, that's my view today as well.
That Al-Qaeda is a myth?
It is for me a myth. I have never had a report from any Afghan source on the Al-Qaeda or what they were doing. We don't see them, we cannot visualize them. For us, they don't exist. I've never had a report from our intelligence, I've never had a report from our people, I've never come across them.
Did they exist in September the 11th? On September the 11th, 2001, was Al-Qaeda operating in Afghanistan?
I have come across the Taliban, I've come across other groups, I've come across the people called, calling themselves different names, different outfits of extremists and terrorists. We have reports about them. I don't know if Al-Qaeda existed and I don't know if they exist. For me, it's a myth. I have to feel tangible about it before I can say they are there.
Do you believe Osama bin Laden carried out the 9/11 attacks in New York and Washington, D.C. and plotted them from Afghanistan?
That is what I have heard from our Western friends. That's what the Western media says. There is no doubt that an operation was a terrorist operation was conducted in New York and in Washington. The tragedy of September 11 is a true one. It caused casualties to the American people, to civilians. We condemn it in the strongest possible words, but I can tell you for a fact that that operation was neither conducted from Afghanistan, nor were the Afghan people responsible for that.
How many Al-Qaeda have you captured?
We haven't captured any Al-Qaeda, but...
And how many have you actually managed to kill here in southeast Afghanistan?
We haven't killed any.
How many Al-Qaeda have you captured?
We haven't captured any Al-Qaeda, but...
And how many have you actually managed to kill here?